So, should Trimet consider buying electric trolleybuses? Yes. Wait, no, there's way more to the video than that. I made a video recently on the debate over battery electric buses versus trolleybuses. This is not that video. This is a follow-up. There are things that I feel as I need to address when it comes to this discussion. Now, I have to be completely clear, oh wait, not that clear, that I do think diesel, for the most part, needs to be on its way out. So, what solution do we turn to minimize the amount of diesel buses? Do we turn to battery electric buses or to trolley buses? Again, I think both can work at the same time, coexisting in the same system. And this video, I'm going to discuss specifically how I would do it in the Trimet system. But this could work just about anywhere. Pick out the points that I'm talking about here. Make sure to watch the video and not skipping around and seeing kind of the general things of what I'm saying. Because there's kind of a lot. This is a more complex of an issue than you might be led to believe initially. Battery electric buses. This, in general, is what I would think the first solution should be. For routes that either just don't run very much, or that are really far from the city center, or just in general, I think if you're going to make a transit agency and you want electric vehicles in your fleet, battery electric is going to be the first choice. They are an easy drop-in replacement for a diesel bus. They don't require any new infrastructure except for the charging infrastructure, which you can install at garages quite easily and at transit centers. You'll also have to train new mechanics on how these work. And I understand that that's not just easy to do, and that diesel buses already exist and we have trained technicians for this already and whatever. But again, diesel's not great for the environment. I already went over this in more than one video, but especially in my first video on the debate of trolleybus versus battery electric bus. Trimet will be getting 24 battery electric buses by the end of next year, and these will be long-range battery electrics with overhead charging infrastructure. This is exactly the direction we should be moving toward. Have that long range so that you can complete long runs on your system, but allow it to also come in and plug in and charge overhead every time it comes back to the transit center. Electric trolley buses. Now, I mentioned in my previous video on this topic that trolley buses have one distinct advantage, and it is that they have incredible hill climbing ability. Now, battery electric buses do too. I mean, they have electric motors as well, but that's at the expense of sucking out a lot of power from your battery. So, in Trimet's system, of which Portland is quite hilly on the outskirts, especially on the west side, Trimet's hilly routes, well, trolley buses would be perfect for that. I showed in that previous video how much the buses struggle, the diesel buses struggle to climb the hills. I showed a clip of the Line 51. I'm going to do that here as well. Take a look at how much a Gillig 30-foot diesel bus struggles climbing up whatever street this was versus a trolley bus in Seattle that I filmed recently. Here's a side-by-side comparison. Now let's talk about frequent trolleys. Now, I saw this come up in several comments on my original video talking about this, and I understand. It'd be nice to not feel like you're wasting money on adding the trolley wire infrastructure so that you can get electric trolley buses to operate on routes that only run during weekday rush. However, unfortunately, a lot of Trimet's hilliest routes just don't run that frequently. However, I've come up with several more routes that I think would be perfect for trolley buses, and these include routes that are more frequently, even if they have gradual hills or whatever. I'm going to mention those at the end of this video, so stick around for that. So, should we outlaw diesels? Logic would seem to say, yes, we should. We know that diesel is bad for the environment. That goes into our atmosphere, and then we breathe in all that garbage. It makes sense to outlaw diesel buses. However, in maybe 5% of the cases, diesel buses do actually make sense. And this can be because of their high reliability. If an electric bus breaks down, it's pretty tempting to just take one of your old diesel buses and tow it off somewhere to go get it fixed. Diesel buses have that sort of flexibility and high reliability that electric buses are only just now starting to get, and it's going to take a while before it reaches the same level a diesel bus currently does. And again, many bus companies already have diesel buses, but if you're going to purchase new buses to use as backup in case an electric bus breaks down or for other situations, I would not rely on just simple diesel buses. I would definitely lean more toward the series hybrid, the hybrid electric buses that have the series hybrid version, because those are much better for the environment. They still use diesel, but they have the electric motors, and they don't use the diesel motor to its full force using the bus. It is better. Again, I definitely think it's something to fall back on more than just, oh, let's go do hybrid electrics then. No, I do think battery electric, because of that zero emissionness, you only produce emissions when you make the bus. Then you keep it in your fleet for 20, 25, 30 years and possibly replace its battery a couple of times after 10 years or so. This bus is going to last forever and zero emissions after manufacturing. Another possible use of bringing out diesel or diesel-electric hybrids instead of battery electrics is when the weather gets sketchy. Several times here it has snowed, or maybe there's a chance of black ice or whatever. The weather just gets kind of sketchy. I never see Trimet run the battery electric buses that we have, all 10 of them, because I just don't imagine it working as well. A diesel bus has a transmission. It's built differently. It can work in snow because of that extra torque. To be fair, in icy weather, nothing's gonna run anyways, so there's no real difference here. There's nothing that comes out on top. But in snowy weather, I just imagine diesel or maybe diesel-electric hybrids working better than electrics. Pay attention to it the next time Portland gets some snowstorm or ice storm. Well, maybe not ice storm, more so snowstorm. Pay attention and check the Rose City bus list, which maybe I'll link in the description, who knows. Check the 3800s and the 4300s. I'm willing to bet none of those will be running. On that note, don't we have issues with batteries working well in the cold and the heat? Yes, I do think this is an issue, but I think this more so was an issue. We absolutely can make insulated battery tanks to hold the batteries. The cold is not really as much of an issue. Maybe if it drops below freezing, sure, but at some point of the day it's going to warm up to more than that. And again, I think having the battery banks insulated to protect against cold weather works, and we're already doing that. Now I have to talk about catenary buses. Yeah, I mentioned this in the last video, and I put some text on the screen, and I'd like to explain that a little bit because of my short-sightedness. I made a point in this video saying that if we, instead of making trolley buses with trolley wires that are not compatible with catenary wires of light rail and streetcar systems, of which we absolutely see in Portland, how do we fix that? Well, what if we made trolley buses with catenary wires and then arms that would touch catenary wires? That way it would keep the compatibility here. Well, there's something that I overlooked until I was editing the video, and yes, e-highways exist, where there are electric trucks transporting freight down highways in Germany. They have the e-highway system on the Autobahn network. And the trucks touch a set of catenary wires and they travel down the highway fully electrically. And if they drive away from the wires, it'll automatically switch to battery electric in many cases. So I was like, can't we just do the same with trolley buses? Buses need to pull over to the curb to load and unload passengers. But with the catenary buses and with two little pantographs touching the overhead wires, that gives you no room to steer away from those wires, definitely not enough to pull over to the curb to serve a bus stop while still contacting the wires. And that would be really annoying, having to go under the wires every single time and raise your pantographs. Unfortunately, yeah, that just really wouldn't work all that great. But with the trolley buses and the trolley poles that reach behind the buses with their long poles, you can be over in each direction, about a lane away from the wires. If you're driving down the middle lane of the road and the wires are down the middle lane of the road, you could drive one lane in each direction and still be contacting the wires. Catenary buses would not do that. The moment you went away from there, catenary poles would disconnect and you'd switch to battery electric, and it would be way too annoying having to keep reconnecting those. So unfortunately, I think that's your reason as to why catenary buses are not being made. So in general, Trimet's routes, I think for the most part these are going to be getting battery electric buses. However, these are the routes that I would put the electric trolley buses on and install trolley wires and do all of that stuff. Before I get into that, New Flyer is the only American bus company making trolley buses. And I know for sure they make 40-foot and 60-foot trolley buses. I've been to Seattle, I've been on both. But New Flyer, in general, also makes 35-foot buses. I do not know if it's possible for them to make a 35-foot trolley bus. Let's hope so, because Trimet has plenty of hilly routes that use the shorter buses because of how windy the roads are. These also include some of my new bus routes that I've created, which I talked about in my Service Improvements Part 2, the video that seemed to go on forever and ever and ever and ever. I talked about my new bus lines that I would create, and those are going to be in here. So if you see bus lines that you're definitely not used to seeing, like the 3 Council Crest or any other renamed bus line, don't be alarmed, those were from me. I'll do my best to explain some of that throughout this. But let's talk about some of these bus lines that could be trolley bus routes, but I don't know if I'd go through the trouble of doing it. And one of them for sure would be the Line 18, Hillside. This route is perfect for trolley buses. It goes up and through the Portland Heights or the Westover, that area. Unfortunately, it runs 1 morning trip and 2 evening trips every weekday. That's it. That would be pointless to install all that infrastructure to run 3 buses the whole day. Unfortunate. The Line 63 up to Rose Garden, that could be totally fine with trolley wires. Do whatever. But I would not extend the wires past the Rose Garden area. On Saturdays and Sundays, as well as almost all trips on the weekdays, all 63 trips end at the Rose Garden, Japanese Garden area. But there are 2 morning trips on the weekdays that go from Oregon Zoo, the MAX station there at Washington Park, all the way into Portland. And because it's just literally 2 trips on weekdays, I wouldn't bother putting the wires there. The line 12, Barbur and Sandy Boulevard, 44, Capitol Highway, Mox Crest, 54, Beaverton Hillsdale Highway, and 56, Shoals Ferry Road, all frequently use Nadeau Parkway and Barbur Boulevard area, which is also known to be quite hilly and interesting terrain, and so I could see all of these using trolley wires. And many of these would just be buses, one right behind the other, being able to use this. Several bus lines run through this portion, and so that's multiple trolley bus route options right there. And these are fairly frequent. And I've been on the line 4 once, so admittedly I don't know how good of a source I am for this. But I'm kind of on the fence of whether to use 40-foot or 60-foot trolley buses for this one. Just simply because, yes, it is a frequent service line, it does get busy, but there are also a lot of turns on this route, and it can get kind of crazy, so not sure. Unfortunately, again because of compatibility with trolley wires and catenary wires, trolley buses would have to travel on battery power through downtown Portland, on the transit mall only. On 5th and 6th Avenues, these buses would have to travel on battery. Because the MAX has a catenary wire, and it weaves in and out from the middle lane to the edge lane. When it's between stations, it's in the middle lane, and when it serves a station, it goes to the curb lane. Same thing the buses do. And there are 4 blocks of bus stops, and then a MAX stop. So there are constantly buses weaving in and out at different parts along the mall, and you would have to cross that catenary wire over and over and over again, and that would be a mess. So unfortunately, they would have to run on battery power on the transit mall. But I still think it's doable. If you have a battery on board that even is just for 10 miles or so of extra range on battery power only for your trolley buses, I think that's more than enough. And then when you stop at the first stop outside the transit mall, you would stop there and raise your poles again. And many newer trolley buses allow you to automatically rewire the bus. So you don't even have to exit the bus anymore and raise the poles manually. Ideally. I know this system is not perfect and doesn't have great reliability, but it is a feature on most modern trolley buses. So here's the chart. Here are all the lines. You can see some of my lines that I've added, but these are kind of what I'm talking about. So line 3, Council Crest, is really just the 51 portion to Council Crest, but it would run way more trips, including weekend trips, for people to go to this park. And I would personally have buses that would say, see Portland from Council Crest, just like it did 100 years ago on the old streetcars to Council Crest. Make it a big deal. Make it something that people want to go and see. Anyways, additional routes on here, you can see, the reason I have the 20 on here is because of Sylvan Hill. The 26 is on here because I know they have snow routes if they close. Ideally, you would get 40-foot trolley buses for this, but Trimet likes to run the smaller buses on it. I have another new bus line on here, the 40 on Terwilliger Boulevard. Which, again, I talked about that in the Service Improvements Part 2. It's basically a Line 8 bus from North Terminal by Union Station all the way up like it's going to go into OHSU, except it doesn't, and it continues on Terwilliger Boulevard. 51 just would go to Dosch and Hamilton now, so there would just be the 51 to Dosch and Hamilton. Pretty much all the rest of these are to be expected, and the 75 would be a trolley bus route because again, it has some hilly areas, but especially because it connects with the line 66 during weekdays, which would have the trolley wires going all the way through there. Of course, there are multiple options. There are additional routes that you could do, no problem. But this here seems to be a fairly decent start. And these buses would be stored at both Merlo and Center garages. You would need a way to get buses back to the garages. In the description, I'm going to hopefully remember to talk about these new bus lines that I've made. And I'll describe each one a little bit so that you can see that. And I'll hopefully, probably almost certainly, link to the service improvements video where I talked about those new routes. Well, that appears to be it. If I have to make another video on trolley buses, I suppose I can, but I would like this to be the last time I talk about them, or at least do a dedicated video on them. I do think Portland needs them. They are a zero-emission technology, and it's a proven technology that goes back almost a century, so I think it would be cool to invest in them. But I will see you on the next video, whatever that is. It's probably more from Seattle.